So, Lorne, let's start with CJGX. That's where you started your career, right?
That's a special place.
Okay.
Yeah, I started there in the 50s. And I had sent out tapes all over. By the way, I knew what I wanted to do for a living when I was in the 5th grade. And any time I went to a city where there were radio stations, I would go to watch the guys work, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd sent out tapes and so on and had no's for answers all along. And my mother had a medical appointment in Yorkton, and I drove her in. And I parked exactly in front of the door of the radio station. And I said, damn it, I'm going to give it one more trial. So I went up and, as it turned out, ran into Merv Phillips, who was the program director. And he put me in front of a microphone. And I said to myself, read that newscast peerlessly, which I did. And he said to me, would you come back around 2 o'clock? So I said, sure. So went back at 2. He took me into the manager's office. Jack Shortreed was the manager at that time. And they said, we'll hire you. You'll be a runner for us. The exhibition is at the middle of the month. For the handsome sum of $135 a month. I thought I had died and gone to heaven. My father worked for the Canadian National Railways, and, they said to me, what is this foolishness about broadcasting? Go to work for the railway and you'll have a pension and all these benefits and so on. So that was really the way it started, and my first day of work was the first day of the Yorkton exhibition. And slowly but surely, I worked in, and Merv one day said he said, Ted Harper will do the top 50 pop tunes Saturday afternoon, and Harasen, you're going to do the top 40 country starting at 9 o'clock in the morning on Saturday morning. I didn't know much about country music, but I learned very, very quickly. And it turned out to be one of the most enjoyable things I ever did. The people, the performers, got to know them. Wonderful people. And got to MC some shows and got to make friends with some. The late Jim Reeves was one. And Hawkshaw Hawkins nominated me to do a thing on WSM in Nashville called Mr. DJ USA. And you'd go down, and what you'd do is you'd do a show on Friday night, right after there was a live show at 8 o'clock called the Friday Night Frolic. And it was live. All the performers were right there, and it was a studio that would seat about 400 people. And then up the hall we went with Grant Turner, who was my host around the station. And I sat behind the mic, and he operated it for me. And I did Mr. DJ USA from 9 till 10. And a couple of the performers from the Friday Night Frolic dropped in to visit with me on the air. One of them was Jim Reeves. That's where the friendship started. And Billy Walker was the other one. Both of them, of course, gone now. And then the next day, I was introduced from the stage of the Grand Ole Opry at the Ryman Auditorium. So I had a very enjoyable time there, but...
And, I mean, the Ryman, still the mother church of country music.
Yep.
How old were you when you stood on that stage?
Well, I can tell you I was 18 years old when I started working at CJGX, and that was about 4 years later, so that would make me about 22. I was a newly married man then. By the way, met my wife. She was a copywriter at CJGX.
Same thing happened to me.
Yeah. And here we are almost 67 years later, still together.
Yeah, that's great. Just a little bit more about that, the Ryman experience. At 22 years of age, did you, I guess, fully appreciate that there is not a lot of on-air people that would have that experience at that age? Canadian, I should say.
Well, there were a couple of Curly Gerlach, who was in Alberta. I think he was in Camrose. May have been in Calgary. Was one that did it, but not many. And I appreciated that fact. There were people that were able to come into the studio that I did the show, Mr. DJ, to watch. And when I finished the show, there were a couple of girls said, "Sure can tell he's a Canadian. He talks funny."
Now, let's talk a little bit now. How did you make the transition from DJ to news? And was it your choice, or did it just happen?
Well, I got my first job offer 6 months after I started at GX. The first one was CKRM in Saskatoon. And I went to Saskatoon, got on a bus overnight, and accepted the job, came back, and Merv Phillips talked me out of it. And in a couple of months, CFQC called and offered a job. Now, this was a bigger outfit, and I accepted it. And it was in the newsroom. There were a big operation, 12 people in the newsroom. Many people will remember Don Whitman, who was the sports director there at the time. And I had the morning run. I cleared 2 teletypes, British United Press, which was a newspaper wire, and you had to edit that copy, and then the BN thing. My alarm rang at 4 a.m., and Mr. Murphy, the owner of the station, would get a cab for the morning newscaster and the morning DJ. And I would phone the cab every night and said, "Don't honk the horn, I'll be there." And my major newscast was at 7:45. It was 15 minutes. And I stayed on the job till noon, and we had a half-hour news block, which was national and international news for 10 minutes, local and regional for 10, and then sports. But you know what? I was in over my head, very young, didn't really know all the nuances of government and how things operated. And I went back to Yorkton because the television license had been approved for Yorkton. Little did I know that when I got back to Yorkton to the radio station didn't want anything to do with any of their people. The TV people said, "Can we use your announcers?" And GX said no, they weren't part of it. So I wound up in the newsroom and ran the newsroom then, and then from there went to CKCK as the radio editor. They had an editor. There was a news manager who was Grant Kennedy at CKCK, and then there was an editor at radio and television. Jim Oxman was at TV. I was at radio, and that's where I stayed. And for a couple of years, I also covered City Hall and was back up at the legislature. And they asked me at one point, after City Hall, would you go on Fred Sears' show and just at 11 o'clock and talk about what happened at City Hall? So I would do that. So the next thing, Jim Struthers, who was the manager of the station, brilliant guy, best manager I ever worked for, said, "How'd you like to do an open line show?" I said, "Well, sure, what about it?" And so he said, "Okay, we'll start at a certain time." Well, 25 minutes. It was 25 minutes long, if you can imagine. And in the first year that I did that, I had all the candidates for city council in the election come in within that 25-minute period as guests.
So had there been an open line show prior to that? That was the first?
No.
Okay.
There was an open line program, a couple of open line programs at CKRM. And I guess the feeling was that RM was starting to gather a lot of audience with that vehicle. And so CKCK, which was in first place, wanted to stay there. And so what happened is that the program expanded to an hour eventually, and then 2 and 3, and by the time I was finished, it was 4.5 hours each day. I had a girl Friday that worked with me, and one thing led to another, and it was an interesting thing, and it's a very tough kind of programming to be involved in, because you can't imagine each day what's going to happen.
And to put into perspective, you had to source all your material with material that was available to you. There is no internet. There's no looking stuff up. You had to source everything.
Well, do you know what I did? What my policy was? We will do what's hot in the news these days. Eventually, we did that. Now, if an author comes through, or a great athlete, or a great politician, well, then you use them as a guest and so on. But for the most part, and I did this at CKRM, what was happening, and right now, for example, Mr. Trump and the efforts to diversify our economy in Canada now presents all kinds of opportunities to do a program. In other words, you hit people where they live. That's what that program should do. And every so often you do something different. I remember one time, I still mention this program because I think it was probably one of the most outstanding experiences I had. People used to say to me, "Who's your favorite guest?" I said, "Oh, there are all kinds of them. But I'll tell you about a program that really moved things." I had a funeral director as a guest once. And about halfway through the program, I get a phone call from Saskatoon, from a man. And he said, "I've been listening to you." He says, he said, "I should tell you my story." And then he started to tell his story. He said, "I've been given only a short time to live." And he proceeded to tell us how he broke the news to his wife and how they discussed his situation and how they should relay that to their children, and they did. And it was, I didn't even take commercial breaks for a while. I just let him talk because it was the most moving thing I'd ever heard.
And this was just a caller?
Just a caller from Saskatoon. And I said to the man near the end of the discussion, I said, "Could you have your family let us know when the day happens?" And they did. They called me and said, "He's gone."
Wow.
It was the most moving thing I ever experienced.
And Lorne, it kind of speaks to the era. That's what radio was. It was that direct, immediate personal connection with the community and the people that were in it.
Right.
Yeah. Now, how did you make the move over to CKRM? What was it? Who sourced you out? Because that was a big deal.
Well, George Gallagher bought CKRM, as you know, and he knew me from CJGX. And he made an offer, and it took me about a week to decide, And at that time, CKRM didn't have a very high profile. The audience was not that great. It was not seen in the community with community activity. And in some ways, it appealed to me that we'd be building something, And that's the way it was, you know. And I went over. He made the offer, and I thought, well, all right, I'll give it a try. Talked to a lot of people, of course, my own family, my wife, about the idea. And I was, I don't think I could say I was ever sorry. It was a tough thing, you know, because there were no contacts, there were no files or anything, and I was starting from scratch, and I had developed this thing at CKCK, and after a lot of work and good contacts, I always felt, you know, you had to get up early in the morning and make sure that you were the leader at all times. And
in the market, in the province, that was big news, though, when you went over to CKRM.
Yeah, and that's as a result of the reputation that had developed at the other station. You know, at the other station, Johnny Sanderson was the morning man, and between he and me, because I followed him, we pretty well had all the available audience that there was at the time. And it was, you know, it's nice to be number one, and it's tough to not be number one, as we were not at CKRM, but we built it, you know, after a while. Some good people, you know, Willie Cole, a dear, dear guy who, great family man and a fine broadcaster. And did he work? He would arrive at work, you know, because you were there, at 5 o'clock in the morning. And very often at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, he was still there.
Let's talk about that, because, of course, you mentioned George Gallagher owning the station, and it was not a popular station. He brought in country music, where it would be that's what the music would be played.
Yep.
Went to the news element, bringing you in to bring that element. And that was just a start. So to think about it in the terms that you put it, you were number one, and you decided to risk it all and see if you could build number one again, and you did.
And then fight number one.
Yes, and exactly.
Yeah.
And the station succeeded.
Yep.
Right? It was 980 CKRM.
Yep.
And it was 620 CKCK. It is now 620 CKRM.
Mm-hmm.
That, in those years that you were building, when did you know, okay, this is going in the right direction? Because you've been doing broadcasting for a while now, so you knew how to judge how things were going. When did you know this is going the right way, this is going to be a big success?
I would say probably in the second, third, fourth year, somewhere in that area, we knew that we were slowly but surely we were getting things. We got the Regina Pat broadcast, we got the Rams, and we were after the Riders, and so on. And we knew that things were better.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about that, about the Riders and about the sports connection, because, as you mentioned, background in music, direct connection with many country artists, into news. Now you have all the news connections and the provincial and federal. Now all of a sudden CKRM starts to go after sports, and you went after the Riders, and you were a big part of those Rider broadcasts when CKRM did get them. That was another big coup in the market to get the Saskatchewan Rough Riders.
Of course. And look, having the Hills by the station was a very positive thing. They are, shall we say, the richest, the biggest business operation in Saskatchewan. They could make it anywhere, but they've chosen to do it in Saskatchewan, and particularly in Regina. And I can tell you that I was pleased in more ways than one about that fact. And time has shown that they've been good for Regina, and I'm sure for CKRM and so on. And to a very great extent, they allowed the station to, let the radio people, radio wasn't something they came with any experience. So they generally let us do our thing. And getting back, and of course, at the same time, Paul Hill was involved with the Rough Riders, and that helped our situation as well. Having the Rough Riders for our radio station in Saskatchewan is very, very important. And I don't, here we are, post Grey Cup. I think we have an idea just how important it is.
And you put together the Rider Broadcast Network as well. That was done, again, with CJGX.
Yeah, I did several kinds of shows. I did one of the things I wanted to have was, it'd be nice to get coaches and even players. Well, if we waited till an hour before kickoff, you couldn't do it. So we said, hey, why don't we, about 3 hours before game time, do a show, and maybe do it from a local restaurant or bar. And that worked out pretty well. And I remember when the Winnipeg Blue Bombers would come to for that Labor Day Classic, I would call Cal Murphy, who was the coach of the Bombers at that time, and I'd pick him up on a Sunday, because usually those games are on Sundays, and I'd pick him up at the hotel, and I'd take him to Mass, and we'd go to church, and then from there we'd go and do the broadcast.
And not all the games were televised. I mean, that radio broadcast for...
Well, we were worried about that, Brad. We were, if they start televising it, are we dead? Well, it just changed our situation. But, and the football club was concerned about the fact, well, if they televise, will people stay home to watch? And that didn't turn out to be a concern either.
And you mentioned the pregame show, but you also then did the postgame call-in.
Yep,
show.
Did that. Did one. I also did one at halftime.
Right.
Called the Rider Notebook, which I think was my last. I tried to come up with something different then, instead of commenting about the quality of play in the game, I'd come up with something else, And that wasn't hard to do,
But it was a complete station effort. There was you, there was Willie. Willie's doing a morning show. You're doing the Harasen line, open line. And when the Rider games were on, you guys were Willie was on the sideline. You were, hosting different aspects of the broadcast.
Yeah.
It really was all hands on deck when the games are on.
That's right. And it was a labor of love. Everybody liked it, and we liked it even better when they won. When they didn't win, of course, it wasn't. And there were some dry years there too, but no, it was all right. I enjoyed it. I had an association with the football club, for a long time. I was what they called a director, and my first job was to try to make sure that we had some kind of Saskatchewan presence in the Grey Cup Festival, starting in the 1960s. I was at City Hall, and I remember that first year, 66, when we won the first Grey Cup, everybody around City Hall was running around trying to decide what should we do, and had no idea. And as it turned out, they repeated in 67, and the same running around took place. So Ken Wade, who was then the ticket manager, came to me and said, would you like a job to see, if we can be there? He said, I have no money. Okay, fine. Nothing new about that. So I took it over, and what I came up with, was we sent a band, a school band, to the Grey Cup for a number of years. And they were happy to do it, you know. We'd go to Kenora or the Lions Band here in Regina. We'd get a little money from the provincial government. And then what would happen was the bands would raise their own money to go. The riders didn't have a budget for it. We felt, you know, we shouldn't, they had this antiquated idea that, well, we'll be in the Grey Cup Festival if our team is there. No way. I mean, you're part of the CFL. You should be there. That's the main event every year, which they are now and have been for a long time. But that was my first job with.
So you started Riderville at the Grey Cup Festival.
Well, yes, in an indirect way. In an indirect way,
in
very
its
indirect.
Current incarnation.
You know, I was going to tell you about another experience, and we did this at CKRM. The reason I raise it is because of all of the fuss now in Iran and Mr. Trump. You'll remember that there was a problem with Iran when it had its revolution, and there were a number of U.S. diplomats who were hidden by the Canadian embassy, and our man spirited the Americans out, got them to the airport, and they got out of the country. Their lives were in danger. I sat there, you know, and I thought, you know what I'm going to do? Said to my girl, call the biggest radio station in Los Angeles and the biggest one in Chicago and Minneapolis, and give them our telephone number, our open line telephone number, and tell them if they'd like to say something in the form of gratitude to Canada, to give us a call. Well, the switchboard exploded, you know, and I've still got the tape. In fact, the tape went to the Saskatchewan archives of people who were driving along, and they had this call and the telephone number, and they phoned, you know, and they said, God, Canada, thank you a million, you know.
So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, you kind of led into it nicely with that story. Your style and how you developed it, I guess, because exactly what you mentioned there, you were able to take the hottest topic, the biggest one in the world at the time, mm-hmm. and bring it home to Saskatchewan. Right? It wasn't just rattling off what came off the Canadian press and you sit there with the BN wire and read it. It was you brought that connection to home, to this province. How did you develop that style? How were you able to consistently deliver that?
Well, you know, we had a discussion before I started doing Open Line. How are you going to do it? Are you going to be Mr. Nice Guy? Or are you going to be tough, you know? And I said, you know what we'll do? We'll do it according to what the weather is like at that time. In other words, what the situation is. If it requires me to be tough, I'll be tough. But if not, I'll just... In other words, I think if you do a put-on, you know, an act, you're going to be found out. You might as well be genuine in yourself and then let the chips fall where they may. You know, there were a number of people that I admired in that field. Jack Webster was one. I went to him once. Well, actually, once and another time as a visitor. I wanted to see how he was doing his administrative stuff and how his girl was working and so on. And so he put me on the air. He says, BC is full of Saskatchewan people. He said, so he wanted to know why Ross Thatcher was defeated, you know. So I sat there and for about an hour, and then before I started, I said to Jack, put a tape on, because if I say it here in Vancouver, I'll play it back home and let the chips fall where they may. And there were people who said to me, God, that Webster is rough. I said, yes, but he's genuine, and he's a damn good reporter. He knew how to get things done, and was very, very strong. Developed a good friendship with him, Went to a hockey game with him and his wife one time while I was there. Another time I visited him, and I was wearing a kind of a light summer suit with a paisley bow tie. And Jack said, somebody phoned in and said, how old would you say Harasen is? And Jack said, I'd say 40-ish. He's 40-ish. Right now, the way he's dressed, he looks like a Liberal candidate on the make.
The one thing I would say about your style was, if someone was a guest on the Harasen line, they either delivered or you were fairly dismissive of them. If they were either there to be the guest they were supposed to be, or you were...
Well, I'd go after them,
yes.
Sure. Try to get them to come clean if I thought they weren't. Didn't have many of those, Brad. Most people came and played the game the way it should be played.
And I mentioned this the other day to someone, talking about this project and what we were doing, and I said, on the Harasen line, if there was... I think it's fair to say that if there was a politician, Hollywood celebrity, that was in the area, an absolute must was they had to appear on the show.
Yep, we went after them. Found out one time that Charlton Heston was shooting a movie in Western Canada, and said to my girl Friday, find him and we'll put him on the air. And he came on, thanked us for allowing him to use his facilities. We talked about movies. He said he was proud of Ben-Hur, the movie. I said to him, is there a movie that you're not proud of? He says, yes. As a matter of fact, it was a movie called Number One, and it was about an aging quarterback. He said it was a terrible movie. He said the only people who liked it were football players.
And you ran, there was no, we're just doing politics, we're just, it was every topical thing, sports, entertainment,
Absolutely.
television, all of it.
Oh, yes. There was one sports director, I won't name him, who complained to management at CKRM that I should not be allowed to do sports stuff. And fortunately, the manager disagreed with that particular sports director, who's no longer there. In fact, I don't think he's alive anymore. But no, I mean, look, if something was happening, look, the day that the rules changed for the CFL, of course you'll talk about that on your program.
Now, did you ever get pushback? Did you ever, they go, no, Lorne, you're not allowed to go there, or you're not allowed to do that? Or was it
the odd time the manager would ask me why I did it, but not often. And I was never successfully sued. Never, in all that time. Mind you, I didn't try to, push my luck that far. There are some open liners who've had a long list of lawsuits, But no, I had one or two times when it was threatened, and I was served with notice. One in particular, I had a professor from the university on with me, and he said some things about the faculty, that really irked them, and they threatened to sue us, and wanted an apology. And our lawyer suggested, no, let the person who said those things apologize, not the radio station or you. So that was about as close as it got. But again, I want to emphasize this. I tried to be responsible about that. I mean, you can be stupid and do things. Well, there were things that we did that many people may have thought were stupid, but no, we tried to play by the rules.
It was informative, and at the same time, it was entertaining.
Yep.
That doesn't get achieved as much these days, in my opinion. That you usually get one or the other, but you don't get both.
Well, Don Heron used to come in every time he was in the area, and of course he's Charlie Farquharson, and I'd have him on with me. And there was a cartoonist who came on once and written a book, tongue-in-cheek, about equality, sexual equality. He was in favor of, giving women equality. But he wrote the book like, a boor. And it was funny. I had a judge friend, the late Ken MacLeod. He was driving to Saskatoon for a court hearing. He said he was listening to this particular program, and he laughed so hard. He said he got to Chamberlain and he pulled over and stopped and laughed and enjoyed it that way. So yeah, there were times we would do that, sure.
Couple questions. Maybe you won't have the answer to it, but is there anybody you wish you had as a guest that you couldn't get as a guest?
Interesting question. I don't know. I don't think so. I was able to basically get everybody that I was interested in. I'll tell you about another little episode. I came home for lunch one day. There was an hour break between, I would do 3 hours in the morning, 3.5, and then from 1 to 2, I would do another hour. So I was able, on the bypass, to go home and have lunch. And my wife decided that morning that she would listen to my competitors. And when I got home, she said, this fellow tried to call Bing Crosby's home. And, of course, he didn't get anywhere. And so I thought that was kind of a funny way to do things because, the chances of getting someone like that by just dialing on the air. I mean, if you got him on the air by dialing, a great coup, but it's not likely to happen. So I said to myself, next year, at Christmas time, my listeners will get Bing Crosby. And I set that up, worked at it early, made my contacts, found out that Larry Crosby, Bing's brother, handled his PR, and indicated. And I said, look, would you tell him that I don't want to hot seat him. I don't want to embarrass him. He's associated with Christmas. And all I'd like to do is just have a pleasant little chat with him. And he said, fine. Didn't hear anything for a long time. And then one day I get a phone call. And the phone call was, Bing and his family are taping the Hollywood Palace Christmas show. And if you'd like to talk to Bing at 2 o'clock, we can arrange it. And so I did. And we did the interview. And the next year, listeners said to me, "Are you going to have Bing on again?" I said, "Would you like him?" I said, "Sure." Okay. So I tried again. And he came on a second time. And then after that, he gave me his home telephone number. And we did 7 Christmases. And I maintained contact with Bing during that time. And then after he passed away with his wife, I was invited to moderate a couple of panels. The 100th anniversary of his birth, he grew up, I guess would be the description, in Spokane, Washington. And he went to Gonzaga University, which is a Spokane institution. It's a small university, about 5,000 students, and it's operated by the Jesuit order. And at the 100th anniversary of his birth, they had a weekend celebration, and I was asked if I could moderate a couple of panels, which I said I would be happy to do, and went. And at that point was able to meet Catherine, the widow, and maintained contact with her for all the years after, until she passed away a couple of years ago, September, a couple of years ago. She sent us, my wife and I, 9 Christmases, she sent us a custom-made Christmas tree decoration, which, of course, we treasured and shared with our family. And during that time, my moderating this, the editor of Bing magazine, which is published in Britain and distributed around the world, and I write for that magazine to this day. In fact, I'm way ahead of time. I have enough stuff written for them about Bing, and that's basically what I write about, and the family and so on. Catherine was a great lady, very resolute. You didn't push her around. And her purpose in life after Bing died was to keep his memory alive and so on. That was probably, you asked me, was there anybody that I really wanted that I couldn't get? I would say that particular episode was probably one of the most satisfying for me of any other contacts, although I've had so many, with politicians and business people and so on.
Now, personal question that you may not want to answer, but were you ever spoken to by your wife or family members saying you went a little far there, that they disagreed with maybe how something was approached?
Oh, sure. My wife has been my best critic, my best booster, and she would say, no, I think I would have done it another way. I'm human, and you develop your likes and dislikes. You get open line programs, you get their regulars, and some of those regulars can be very, very difficult to tolerate. Mm-hmm. But sure, I'd get letters. I thought at one time that I saved a lot of my letters. I developed what I called my Lulu file. They were either funny or they were pathetic, or in many cases, they let me have it, and you have to accept that, And you get phone calls, too, of course. For a long time, I was unlisted in the city, changed that, of course, eventually. And now, well, even now, I run in, I've been over 25 years, more than 25 years since I retired. I still run into people who remember me. I was in the barber shop one day talking to my barber, lady barber, great barber, Tiana. And it was, people recognized my voice. They were in the waiting room. So when I got out of the chair, how are you? What are you doing these days? That kind of thing, But more and more, people don't know me. And that's fine with me.
Well, it takes years, I think, for that to happen, because you were a daily part of people's lives. That audio was in their head.
5 days a week?
Yeah. That audio was in their head. And then if the game was on a Sunday, you were there as well. Like sometimes it was 6 days a week.
Well, I'll tell you about that. We had the Memorial Cup final here, junior hockey. And I went to a game on a Friday night. And it was our opinion, and many people in the audience, that one of the teams threw the game. In other words, they wanted somebody else to win. And so I went to Saturday morning, went to the radio station and opened it up. We were carrying, junior hockey at that time, and opened the lines, and sure as guns, all kinds of people who were in the audience agreed that there was something amok in that little contest.
And you had the ability to do that in the moment, to realize this is the hottest topic right now. I'm going down to the radio station and I'm opening this up.
Yeah, we did that quite often. Something happened. Election nights, you could find me at work all the time, all through the half century that I was associated with a radio station, whether it be municipal, provincial, or federal. I was at work, and at RM, I generally anchored election night coverage. Used to say to the guys, the reporters that were out, don't give me color or background. When you get numbers, that's all I want. Just tell me numbers.
So I want to say a few names to you, a couple names to you. You mentioned Willie Cole, mm-hmm. Fred King.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts?
Fred King? Well, he was a country music expert. And he's in the Canadian Country Music Hall of Fame. The late Fred King. Yeah, he was country through and through.
Jim Smalley.
Oh, Jim's a great guy. He was the farm director, and I was glad that he came over to CKRM. He had a nice way about doing his work, He was able to work with both sides in an issue, agricultural issue, and I think if you're going to be responsible as a farm director, it's important, and he did that, yeah.
And he was part of that, best way to put it is, he was part of that, we've got to acquire the best people.
Mm-hmm.
And that was of your opinion of him.
Yeah, not complicated guy, very friendly. Yeah, Jim is good guy.
Jeff Courier.
Very professional sportscaster. Yeah, very professional. Prepared very well. I admired the way he did things. And you know what I would do, because of my admiration for him, many times, some of the pictures I've turned over to you, if I had a sports figure on and he was around and interested, I'd say, come on with me for the broadcast. Yeah, good man.
Perry Nias.
Oh, another, the cream of the crop people, one of the nicest fellas you'll find. He was a good airman, but, I understand as a salesman he is top-notch, and I'm not surprised. I'm sure that businesses like to do business with him. Perry's a good fellow.
Now, it would have been hundreds of people you would have worked with, hundreds of staff members that you would have worked with. We talked about the start. How do you make the decision to stop? How do you make the decision that it's time that I'm going to hang up the headphones?
Oh, I think you get tired, and your health as you get older starts to unravel a bit. And you want more time maybe for family, and you'd like to do some traveling. We did our traveling right after I retired, Europe, et cetera, cruises. Until one day I got up and looked in the mirror in my bathroom and said to myself, I don't want to go to the airport today, but I had to. And I knew that was all we needed, So we did that traveling then, and so on. And, it was time. It was just time.
What, with the state of the world as it is right now, and I don't believe there's a possible way that you couldn't be watching the news all the time and keeping up to date with everything all the time.
Oh, yes, I am.
What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts about the state of the nation and our relationships outside the country, the way it is right now?
Well, I'm concerned. I would have never dreamed in a million years that someone like Trump would come along and lead the country to the south of us. I don't like very much of what he's done. I am very concerned about what he's done to our economy, or is trying to do to it. Fortunately, we seem to have a prime minister who wants to deal with that, and I think so far he's handled things very well. It's a more complex world than ever, and with the additional problem of weather and what's happening, global warming, we have a number of hurdles, and I wouldn't want to be in the shoes of some people. And I wonder what sort of world we're turning over to our young people. I have 3 little great-granddaughters, ages 3, 4, and 5. And I wonder about what they will have to deal with. My grandchildren are all adults now. I have 5 of them. Youngest one is 23, teaches high school here in Regina. And the oldest is my granddaughter in Saskatoon. She's the executive director of the Jazz Festival. She's the one that's provided me with 2 great-grandchildren. That's the one concern I have, is what kind of world we're turning over. I'm concerned about the ethics that govern us. What do we stand for?
Now, we're in a studio here at CKRM. We've got cameras and television monitors and everything else. What do you think about the state of media right now? Whether it's local or national, whatever. What's your thoughts? And be honest, it's okay.
Well, I think radio has a tough time. Radio has changed several times in its history. Everywhere from the morning and afternoon soaps to Boston Blackie and Charlie McCarthy. We've come a long way, and we're going to have to change again, I think. I wonder what the role of a local television station is anymore. because we've got specialties now. We've got news channels, we've got sports channels. You know, I've got a baseball channel that I watch in my home. So there's going to be change there. I also wonder about the ethics that govern our media. We're supposed to reflect society. In some cases, I think maybe we try to influence society to go a particular way. So I wonder about that. I think that it's going to be a tough time. I'm just as glad I'm retired.